Do you ever feel like reading books is always the right thing to do, but somehow you're still not seeing the changes you hoped for? What if the problem isn't the books you're reading, but the very act of reading itself? Could it be that, despite our best intentions, reading can sometimes hold us back instead of pushing us forward? In today's video, we'll uncover the uncomfortable truths about reading, according to Lee Maxwell, and why you might need to rethink your relationship with books. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Knowledge. Picture this. You're sitting comfortably with a book in hand, feeling the weight of wisdom at your fingertips. As you turn the pages, soaking in the words of the author, there's a sense of accomplishment brewing within you. You're learning something new, expanding your horizons, and surely, with each chapter, you're getting smarter. But Lee Maxwell asks us to pause for a moment and question this. Are you really gaining knowledge, or is it just an illusion? Maxwell opens his book with a provocative idea. Reading books, while commonly regarded as one of the most noble and productive activities, does not automatically translate into knowledge. This might sound counterintuitive after all. Isn't that why we read? To learn, to grow, to gain insights that will help us navigate the complexities of life? But the uncomfortable truth, as Maxwell puts it, is that reading can give us a false sense of understanding. It creates an illusion, a mirage where we believe we are growing intellectually when, in reality, we might be just skimming the surface. Consider how often we finish a book, put it down, and move on to the next one without a second thought. Perhaps we even share a quote or two from the book on social media, giving off the impression that we've gained profound insights. Yet, if someone were to ask us what we truly learned or how we've applied that knowledge, many of us would stumble. This is the crux of Maxwell's argument. Reading can feel like learning, but without reflection, digestion, and action, it's merely an illusion. Maxwell doesn't claim that books are useless. Quite the contrary. He acknowledges the vast reservoir of wisdom that can be found within the pages of great works. But he warns that unless we actively engage with the content, we risk falling into a trap where the act of reading becomes more about appearance than transformation. Think about it. How many times have you heard someone boast about reading 50 or 100 books in a year? We are living in an age where the number of books consumed has become a status symbol, a measure of one's intellectual worth. But Maxwell challenges this notion. He asks us to reflect on the depth of our reading rather than the quantity. He shares a striking analogy. Reading without reflection and action is like eating without digesting. You can consume as much as you like, but without proper digestion, it does nothing for your body. Similarly, you can read every book under the sun, but without proper reflection and application, it does little for your mind. It's the difference between surface knowledge and mastery. Surface knowledge allows us to regurgitate facts, but mastery comes from truly understanding and applying the concepts we've learned in real life. Maxwell introduces the concept of the knowledge illusion, a phenomenon where we think we know more than we actually do because we've read about it. This illusion can be particularly dangerous because it prevents us from taking further steps to truly understand and master the material. We stop at the reading stage, thinking we've accomplished something, when in reality, we've barely scratched the surface. For instance, think about the last book you read. How much of its content can you clearly recall? How much of it have you applied to your life or work? If the answer is not much, then, according to Maxwell, you've likely fallen into the illusion of knowledge. It's a humbling realization, but one that Maxwell insists is necessary if we are to become truly knowledgeable individuals. Maxwell offers a simple but powerful solution to this dilemma. Stop rushing through books. Instead, he urges us to slow down, engage deeply with the material, and most importantly, take time to reflect on what we've read. He introduces the idea of active reading, where the goal isn't just to finish a book, but to wrestle with its ideas, challenge its assumptions, and integrate its lessons into our lives. To Maxwell, reading is not a race. It's not about how fast you can finish a book, or how many books you can add to your list by the end of the year. It's about the quality of your engagement with the material. Are you truly absorbing the lessons? Are you applying what you've learned? Are you growing from the experience? Maxwell's words resonate in a world where productivity is often measured by how much we can do in the shortest amount of time. We've been conditioned to believe that more is always better, but Maxwell challenges this belief. He invites us to step back and reconsider our approach to reading. He suggests that it's not the quantity of books we read that matters, but the quality of our understanding and application of what we've read. The illusion of knowledge is a theme that runs throughout the book, and Maxwell returns to it often as he delves deeper into the reasons why we read and how we can break free from the traps that prevent us from truly learning. It's a sobering realization, but also an empowering one, because it gives us the opportunity to change how we approach reading, and by extension, how we approach learning and personal growth. In essence, Maxwell is asking us to rethink our relationship with books. Instead of viewing them as trophies to be collected, we should see them as tools for transformation. This shift in perspective can make all the difference between simply being well-read and being truly knowledgeable. And that, Maxwell argues, is the uncomfortable truth we must face if we are serious about personal growth. Chapter 2: Why We Really Read. As Maxwell delves deeper into the uncomfortable truths surrounding reading, he invites us to take a hard look at the reasons why we read in the first place. On the surface, most of us would say we read to learn, to grow, or to entertain ourselves. We might even argue that reading is a way to engage with the world, to become more knowledgeable, and to make better decisions. But Maxwell isn't satisfied with these surface-level answers. He probes deeper, asking us to confront a more unsettling question. Are these really our reasons for reading? Or are there hidden motivations at play that we don't often acknowledge? In this chapter, Maxwell explores the more psychological and, at times, uncomfortable reasons why people turn to books. He argues that, while many of us claim to read for self-improvement or knowledge, the truth is often more complex. For some, reading becomes a form of escapism, a way to avoid the realities of life, or to procrastinate on more pressing matters. For others, it becomes a tool for social validation, a way to appear intellectual or knowledgeable to others. These motivations, Maxwell argues, often go unexamined but play a significant role in our reading habits. He starts by examining the concept of reading as escapism. In today's fast-paced world, filled with responsibilities, challenges, and sometimes overwhelming stresses, reading can offer a much-needed escape. When life feels too difficult to face head-on, diving into a book can provide temporary relief. Whether it's fiction or nonfiction, a book can transport us to another world or give us the illusion of control, where we feel we're making progress simply by turning the pages. Maxwell explains that this isn't inherently a bad thing. After all, everyone needs an escape now and then, and books are certainly a healthier form of escape than many other alternatives. But he warns that when reading becomes a consistent way to avoid dealing with real-life issues, it can be problematic. The act of reading, while comforting, doesn't solve the underlying problems we might be facing in our personal or professional lives. In fact, it can sometimes make things worse by allowing us to avoid taking action. It creates a buffer between us and reality, a safe zone where we can feel productive without actually doing anything. Maxwell offers a relatable example. You've had a rough day at work, and you know you need to make some changes in how you handle your time or your responsibilities. But instead of sitting down and tackling those issues head-on, you decide to read a book about time management. It feels productive, and in the moment, it even feels like a solution. But in reality, you're not taking any concrete steps to change your situation. You're simply postponing the hard work by immersing yourself in a book that gives you the illusion of progress. He goes on to explore another uncomfortable truth. For many of us, reading serves as a form of procrastination. We read not to act, but to delay action. Think about how often you've read books on topics like productivity, personal development, or habits, only to finish the book without implementing any of the advice. In the moment, it feels like you're preparing yourself for action, gathering knowledge, learning strategies. But when it comes time to put that knowledge into practice, there's always another book to read, another source of wisdom to uncover before you feel ready. Maxwell isn't shy about calling this out. He explains that reading, when done without the intention of applying what we've learned, can be a sophisticated form of procrastination. It's a way to stay in motion without actually making progress. We tell ourselves that we're learning, that we're preparing for future action, but in reality, we're just delaying the inevitable work that needs to be done. This brings him to a key point. Reading is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. But too often, we treat the act of reading as the goal, as if the mere consumption of words will lead to transformation. Maxwell argues that reading should be the starting point of a journey, not the journey itself. It's what we do with the knowledge we gain from books that really matters. If we're reading to avoid action, to procrastinate, or to escape, then we're not using books in the way they're meant to be used. But procrastination and escapism aren't the only hidden motivations behind reading. Maxwell also examines the role of social validation in our reading habits. In a world where intellectualism is often tied to status, many people read not for personal growth but to appear well-read. It's an uncomfortable truth, but one that Maxwell believes needs to be addressed. He explains that in certain circles, being seen as someone who reads a lot can elevate one's social standing. Whether it's through casual conversations where people drop the titles of books they're reading or social media posts flaunting carefully curated bookshelves, there's a performative aspect to reading that often goes unacknowledged. People don't just read to learn. They read to be seen as learned. This pursuit of social validation can be subtle, but its effects are profound. It pushes people to read books they might not be genuinely interested in, simply because those books are popular or respected in certain communities. It encourages superficial reading, where the goal is not to understand or apply the material, but to check off another title and add it to the list of books I've read. Maxwell is particularly critical of this trend, as it reduces reading to a status symbol rather than a tool for personal growth. The pursuit of social validation through reading also leads to what Maxwell calls intellectual vanity. It's the desire to appear smarter or more knowledgeable than others by consuming vast amounts of information, regardless of whether that information is truly valuable or applicable. Intellectual vanity, Maxwell argues, creates a competitive atmosphere where people are more focused on how much they read rather than what they've learned. He paints a picture of someone who reads dozens of books a year, not because they genuinely want to learn, but because they want to be able to say they've read those books. They want the admiration, the respect, and the validation that comes with being well-read. But in the process, they miss out on the true purpose of reading: personal growth and understanding. Maxwell challenges readers to reflect on their own motivations. Why do you read? Are you reading to escape, to procrastinate, or to impress others? Or are you reading to grow, to challenge yourself, and to apply what you've learned to your life? It's a tough question, but one that Maxwell insists we must answer honestly if we are to truly benefit from the books we read. As the chapter comes to a close, Maxwell offers a simple but profound piece of advice. Be intentional with your reading. Don't just read for the sake of reading. Instead, read with purpose. Choose books that align with your goals, that challenge you, and that inspire you to take action. And most importantly, don't let reading become a substitute for the real work of personal growth. Maxwell's message is clear. Books are powerful tools, but only if we use them wisely. If we're reading to avoid reality, to procrastinate, or to gain social validation, then we're not truly benefiting from the wealth of knowledge that books offer. The uncomfortable truth is that many of us read for reasons we'd rather not admit. But by confronting these motivations, we can begin to read with greater purpose and intention. Chapter 3. The Social Status of Being Well-Read. As we journey further into Lee Maxwell's exploration of the uncomfortable truths surrounding reading, the focus shifts to a more societal aspect of why we read: the quest for social status. In a world where intellect is often synonymous with success, Maxwell unravels a painful reality. Many people read not because they're driven by a thirst for knowledge or personal growth, but because they crave the social validation that comes with being perceived as well-read. Imagine this scenario. You walk into a room full of people and someone casually mentions the latest bestseller they've just finished. Immediately, the conversation turns to books, authors, and intellectual pursuits. There's a quiet competition in the air. Everyone wants to showcase their reading habits, to flaunt their intellectual muscles. It's no longer about what the book meant to them or how it changed their perspective. Instead, it's about proving that they are part of an elite club of well-read individuals. And in this moment, the book becomes a tool, a status symbol, rather than a source of wisdom. Maxwell dives deep into this cultural obsession with being well-read. He explains that historically, reading was once a privilege reserved for the educated elite, a mark of status and intellectual prowess. Over time, this association between reading and intellect became ingrained in society. To be well-read meant to be respected, admired, and in many cases, considered more intelligent or successful than others. This cultural reverence for reading persists to this day, but Maxwell argues that it has taken on a performative nature. In modern times, being well-read is not just about personal growth. It has become a way to gain social capital. People talk about the books they've read, not because they want to share the insights they've gained, but because they want to be seen as intellectual. Maxwell is unflinching in his critique of this trend, pointing out how it encourages people to focus on quantity over quality. People are more concerned with the number of books they can say they've read, rather than the depth of understanding they've achieved. Maxwell tells the story of a man he once knew, a voracious reader who prided himself on finishing hundreds of books a year. He would rattle off titles and authors in casual conversation, always eager to display his extensive literary knowledge. But when pressed about what he had learned from those books, or how they had changed his thinking, the man often struggled to articulate anything meaningful. His reading habits were more about maintaining an image of being well-read than about personal growth or understanding. He was reading to impress others, not to challenge himself or expand his worldview. Maxwell uses this story as a launching pad to explore a broader phenomenon, the intellectual vanity that drives so much of our reading today. Intellectual vanity is the desire to appear smarter, more knowledgeable, or more cultured than others by consuming vast amounts of information. It's the need to keep up with the latest books, to stay ahead of the curve, to have something to contribute in intellectual conversations. And in a world where knowledge is power, this vanity can be deeply seductive. The problem, Maxwell explains, is that intellectual vanity often leads to shallow engagement with the material. When people read to boost their status, they tend to prioritize speed over comprehension. The goal is no longer to absorb and reflect on the ideas within a book, but to finish it as quickly as possible so they can move on to the next one. It becomes a race, one that is fueled by the need to maintain appearances. Maxwell paints a vivid picture of what this looks like in the age of social media. Platforms like Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads have transformed reading into a performative act. People post pictures of their latest reads, share quotes, and curate their reading lists for public consumption. While these platforms can be valuable for fostering discussions around books, Maxwell argues that they can also encourage performative reading. The more books you display, the more intellectual you appear to others. But this public display of reading, he warns, can overshadow the true purpose of engaging with a book. He provides a sobering example. Imagine someone who reads a difficult, thought-provoking book, but takes their time with it. They highlight passages, take notes, and spend weeks or even months reflecting on its ideas. On the other hand, imagine someone who breezes through the same book in a week, barely pausing to think about the concepts. In a social media-driven world, the second person might gain more recognition for being a fast, prolific reader, even though their engagement with the material was shallow. Meanwhile, the first person, who spent time truly absorbing the book's content, might go unnoticed. Maxwell's critique of the well-read status is not meant to discourage reading, but rather to encourage a more mindful and intentional approach. He believes that reading should be a deeply personal experience, one that is driven by curiosity, passion, and a desire for growth. But when the focus shifts to social validation, it dilutes the transformative power of books. we begin to prioritize what others think of our reading habits over the insights we're gaining from the books themselves. One of the more insidious aspects of this cultural obsession with being well-read, according to Maxwell, is how it can distort our choices in what we read. Instead of choosing books that genuinely interest us or that align with our personal goals, we gravitate toward books that are trendy, popular, or widely respected. We seek out titles that will enhance our image rather than challenge our thinking. Maxwell calls this reading by recommendation, where we let others dictate our reading choices based on what is considered intellectual or culturally valuable. He gives the example of literary fiction. For many, reading classic or highbrow fiction is seen as a mark of sophistication. But not everyone enjoys this genre, and that's perfectly fine. The problem arises when people feel compelled to read these books, not because they are genuinely interested, but because they believe it will elevate their status. Maxwell argues that this type of reading is inauthentic and ultimately unfulfilling. If you're not reading for yourself, then the experience is hollow. Maxwell also touches on the competitive nature of reading. In intellectual circles, there can be an unspoken competition to see who has read the most, the fastest, or the most complex books. This competition fuels a cycle of constant reading without reflection, where the goal is to outdo others rather than to engage meaningfully with the material. Maxwell warns that this competitive mindset can erode the joy of reading, turning it into a chore or a performance rather than a fulfilling pursuit. As the chapter progresses, Maxwell offers a counterpoint to this obsession with being well-read. He encourages readers to embrace a slower, more thoughtful approach to books. Instead of chasing after the next big title or trying to keep up with intellectual trends, he advises us to focus on what truly resonates with us. Reading should be a personal journey, not a public performance. It should be about exploring ideas that challenge us, inspire us, and help us grow, rather than proving our intellectual worth to others. Maxwell closes the chapter with a powerful reminder. Being well-read is not about how many books you've read or how impressive your reading list looks. It's about the depth of your engagement with the material and how it impacts your life. True intellectual growth comes from reflection, contemplation, and, most importantly, action. The books we read should serve as a catalyst for change, not a trophy to be displayed for others. This chapter leaves readers with a poignant question to ponder. Are you reading to impress others, or are you reading to improve yourself? It's a question that cuts to the heart of Maxwell's message, forcing us to confront the uncomfortable reality of our motivations. And in doing so, it challenges us to rethink our relationship with books and, ultimately, with ourselves. Chapter 4. Reading as a Form of Procrastination. As we journey deeper into an uncomfortable truth about reading books, Maxwell confronts yet another uncomfortable reality about reading: the subtle and often unnoticed way it can serve as a form of procrastination. This chapter is both a revelation and a wake-up call, as Maxwell pulls back the curtain on one of the most common but overlooked habits of readers: using books as a means to delay action. Maxwell begins by asking us to think about the times we've turned to a book when faced with a problem or a challenge. Whether it's a career decision, a personal dilemma, or a desire to change some aspect of our lives, we often seek answers in books. This, in itself, isn't inherently problematic. Books are, after all, incredible sources of wisdom and guidance. But Maxwell points out that there's a fine line between seeking knowledge to solve a problem and using reading as a way to avoid taking the necessary steps toward a solution. Imagine this scenario. You're unhappy in your job. You feel unfulfilled and know that something needs to change, but instead of updating your resume, looking for new opportunities, or starting that passion project you've been thinking about, you pick up a book about finding your purpose. The book promises to guide you through the process of self-discovery, and as you read, you feel a sense of progress, as though you're getting closer to the solution. But once you finish the book, nothing changes. You haven't taken any concrete steps toward finding a new job or starting your project. And so, you pick up another book, hoping that this one will be the key to unlocking the change you seek. Maxwell argues that this cycle, reading as a way to delay action, is far more common than we realize. Books, especially those in the self-help or personal development genres, can create a comforting illusion of progress. They make us feel like we're doing something, even when we're not. By reading about productivity, motivation, or success, we convince ourselves that we're preparing for action, but in reality, we're postponing the hard work that real change requires. Maxwell calls this the reading trap. It's a trap that's easy to fall into, especially in today's culture, where knowledge is highly valued and self-help literature is abundant. We're constantly encouraged to read more, learn more, and prepare ourselves for the future. But what happens when all this reading becomes a substitute for action? What happens when we spend more time consuming information than applying it? The answer, Maxwell suggests, is that we remain stuck. We stay in the same place, reading book after book, while the changes we hope for remain out of reach. This is the danger of reading as procrastination. It keeps us in a state of perpetual preparation, where we feel like we're moving forward, but in reality, we're standing still. Maxwell illustrates this point with the story of a woman named Sarah. Sarah had always dreamed of starting her own business, but she didn't feel ready. So she began reading books about entrepreneurship, business strategy, and personal growth. She devoured them, believing that each new book would give her the knowledge and confidence she needed to finally take the plunge. But years passed, and Sarah still hadn't started her business. She kept telling herself that she just needed to read one more book, gather a bit more information, and then she'd be ready. But the truth was, Sarah was using books to avoid the fear and uncertainty that came with taking real action. She was procrastinating, even though it didn't feel like procrastination because reading seemed productive. Maxwell points out that Sarah's story is not unique. Many of us fall into this same pattern, especially when faced with big, daunting tasks or life changes. We turn to books for comfort, for guidance, for a sense of control. And while reading can certainly provide valuable insights, it can also become a crutch, something we lean on to avoid the discomfort of actually doing the work. Maxwell doesn't dismiss the value of reading, but he challenges us to examine our relationship with it. Are we reading to learn, or are we reading to avoid? Are we using books as tools for growth, or as distractions from the real work that needs to be done? It's a tough question, but one that Maxwell believes is essential if we want to break free from the reading trap. One of the key ideas Maxwell introduces in this chapter is the concept of diminishing returns. He explains that the more we read without taking action, the less value we gain from each new book. At first, reading can be incredibly helpful. It introduces us to new ideas, provides us with strategies, and gives us the inspiration to move forward. But if we don't act on that inspiration, it begins to fade. The more we read without applying what we've learned, the more we become desensitized to the ideas and principles that once felt so powerful. Maxwell likens this to a form of intellectual stagnation. We keep filling our minds with information, but because we're not putting that information into practice, it just sits there, unused. Over time, the excitement we once felt when learning something new begins to wane. We become passive consumers of knowledge, rather than active participants in our own growth. To avoid falling into this trap, Maxwell suggests a simple but effective solution. Action first, reading second. Instead of reading book after book in the hopes of finding the perfect answer, take action on what you already know. Start small if you have to, but start. Once you've taken that first step, then go back and read more if you need to. But the key is to make sure that your reading is in service of your actions, not the other way around. Maxwell offers another example to illustrate this point. Imagine you want to improve your fitness, so you start reading books about exercise, diet, and health. You learn about different workout routines, nutrition plans, and strategies for staying motivated. But instead of going to the gym or changing your diet, you keep reading, telling yourself that you're still preparing, still gathering information. Weeks go by, and you haven't made any changes. You're still in the same place, except now you have more knowledge about fitness than ever before. Maxwell argues that in this scenario, the problem isn't a lack of knowledge, it's a lack of action. You don't need to read another book about fitness. You need to get off the couch and start moving. And once you've started, once you've taken that first step, then you can go back to the books for guidance and refinement. But the key is to start with action, not with reading. He also highlights the importance of setting limits on your reading. It's easy to fall into the habit of thinking that you need to know everything before you can take action. But Maxwell argues that this is rarely the case. In most situations, we already know enough to get started. The real learning comes from doing, from making mistakes, and from adjusting as we go. Books can provide guidance, but they can't replace the experience of taking action. Maxwell's message in this chapter is clear. Reading is valuable, but only if it leads to action. If we're using books as a way to avoid the discomfort of doing the work, then we're not really growing. We're just procrastinating in a more socially acceptable way. The uncomfortable truth is that reading, while important, is not a substitute for action. To achieve real change, we have to be willing to step out of the safety of our books and into the messy, uncertain world of doing. As this chapter comes to a close, Maxwell leaves us with a powerful challenge. The next time you find yourself reaching for a book to solve a problem, pause and ask yourself, what can I do right now with the knowledge I already have? Take that first step, however small, and then use books to guide you along the way. But don't let reading become an excuse for inaction. The real transformation happens when we stop reading about change and start making it. Chapter 5. The False Promise of Self-Help Books. As we move into the next chapter of an uncomfortable truth about reading books, Maxwell takes on one of the most popular genres in modern literature: self-help books. For many of us, these books have been go-to sources for motivation, personal growth, and inspiration. The shelves of bookstores and the recommendations on reading lists are filled with titles promising to help us improve ourselves, become more productive, or live happier lives. But in this chapter, Maxwell shines a critical light on the self-help industry, questioning the real value of these books and whether they truly deliver on their promises. Maxwell begins by acknowledging the allure of self-help books. They offer something deeply appealing: the promise of transformation. Who wouldn't want to read a book that claims to have the answers to life's most pressing questions, or the keys to unlocking one's full potential? The titles themselves are often irresistible. How to Win Friends and Influence People, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, The Power of Now. These books hold out the hope that by simply reading them, we can become better versions of ourselves. But Maxwell challenges us to step back and ask a difficult question. Do self-help books really lead to meaningful, lasting change? Or are they selling us a comforting but ultimately false promise? He argues that for many people, self-help books offer little more than a temporary boost of motivation, a fleeting sense of empowerment that fades as quickly as it arrives. Maxwell points to a common experience among readers of self-help literature. You pick up a book that promises to change your life, and as you read, you feel inspired, energized, and ready to take on the world. The author's words resonate with you, and you start to believe that maybe, just maybe, this book holds the key to unlocking the success or happiness you've been seeking. But then, a few days or weeks after finishing the book, the motivation starts to wear off. The initial excitement fades, and life goes back to the way it was before. You haven't made any real changes, and the promises the book made feel more distant than ever. This cycle, Maxwell explains, is all too common in the world of self-help. These books are designed to be uplifting and motivating, but they rarely provide the practical, actionable steps needed to create lasting change. Instead, they offer general advice, platitudes, and feel-good messages that make readers feel better in the moment, but do little to address the deeper, more complex challenges they face. Maxwell is particularly critical of the way self-help books are marketed. He argues that the self-help industry thrives on selling hope rather than results. The more books you read, the more you start to believe that the next one will be the one that finally changes everything. But this hope, Maxwell warns, is often misplaced. Self-help books, he argues, are more about making the reader feel good than actually helping them take meaningful action. To illustrate this point, Maxwell shares the story of a man named Jake, who spent years reading self-help books in search of the answers to his problems. Jake was constantly looking for the secret to success, whether in his career, relationships, or personal growth. He would read one book after another, each one leaving him feeling inspired but ultimately unchanged. After finishing each book, Jake would feel a burst of motivation, but that feeling would quickly fade, and he'd find himself back at square one. He kept searching for the magic bullet, the one book that would finally unlock the door to the life he wanted. But after years of reading, Jake realized that nothing had really changed. The self-help books had given him temporary hope, but no lasting results. Maxwell uses Jake's story as a cautionary tale, warning readers not to fall into the trap of thinking that more reading will lead to more change. He explains that self-help books often fail because they oversimplify complex problems. Life's challenges, whether they're related to personal growth, relationships, or career success, are rarely solved by the kind of broad, one-size-fits-all advice found in most self-help books. Real change, Maxwell argues, requires more than just inspiration. It requires a deep understanding of yourself, your unique circumstances, and the willingness to take difficult, often uncomfortable, action. Maxwell is also critical of the formulaic nature of many self-help books. He explains that these books tend to follow a predictable pattern. They start with a hook that draws the reader in, followed by a personal story or anecdote from the author's life, and then move on to a series of steps or principles that are supposed to lead to success. While this formula can be engaging, Maxwell argues that it often lacks depth. The advice given is usually too general to be truly effective, and the steps are often too vague or idealistic to be practical. One of Maxwell's main criticisms of self-help books is that they rarely address the root causes of the problems they claim to solve. Instead of helping readers dig deep and confront the underlying issues in their lives, these books tend to focus on surface-level solutions. For example, a self-help book might tell you to think positively or believe in yourself, but it doesn't help you understand why you struggle with negative thinking or self-doubt in the first place. As a result, the solutions offered are often superficial and short-lived. Maxwell also explores the psychological impact of self-help books. He explains that in many cases, these books can actually do more harm than good by reinforcing feelings of inadequacy. When readers don't achieve the results promised by the book, they often blame themselves rather than questioning the book's advice. They think, if I'm not succeeding, it must be because I'm not trying hard enough or because there's something wrong with me. This creates a vicious cycle where readers continue to consume more self-help books in the hope of finding the solution, but each book only reinforces the belief that they are somehow inadequate. Maxwell is careful to point out that not all self-help books are created equal. There are some that offer valuable insights and practical strategies for personal growth, but he urges readers to approach the genre with a critical eye. Before diving into a new self-help book, he suggests asking a few key questions. Is this book offering something truly new, or is it just repackaging the same ideas I've read before? Is the advice actionable and specific, or is it vague and general? Most importantly, is this book encouraging me to take real, concrete steps toward change, or is it simply giving me a temporary boost of motivation? Maxwell offers a solution for those who find themselves trapped in the self-help cycle. Stop reading for motivation and start reading for action. Instead of looking for books that make you feel good, look for books that challenge you, that force you to confront uncomfortable truths about yourself and your life. Choose books that offer practical, actionable advice that you can immediately put into practice. And most importantly, don't let the act of reading become a substitute for doing the real work of personal growth. Maxwell's advice is simple but powerful. Read less, but apply more. Instead of devouring book after book, take the time to reflect on what you've read and how you can apply it to your life. Choose one or two key ideas from a book and focus on implementing them before moving on to the next one. This approach, Maxwell argues, leads to real, lasting change rather than the fleeting sense of motivation that so many self-help books offer. As the chapter draws to a close, Maxwell leaves readers with a sobering but empowering message. Self-help books can be a valuable tool for personal growth, but only if we use them wisely. They should be seen as guides, not magic solutions. The real work of change happens outside the pages of a book, in the actions we take and the choices we make in our daily lives. The promise of transformation is real, but it's not something that can be delivered in a neatly packaged 300-page book. It's something we have to work for, day in and day out. Chapter 6. Quantity over Quality. In this next chapter of An Uncomfortable Truth About Reading Books, Maxwell turns his attention to the modern obsession with reading as a numbers game. In today's fast-paced world, where productivity is often measured by how much we can achieve in the shortest amount of time, reading is no exception. Social media, Goodreads challenges, and personal goals all push the narrative that the more books you read, the better. But in this chapter, Maxwell dismantles this idea, arguing that when it comes to reading, more is not always better. In fact, focusing on quantity over quality can rob us of the true value of the reading experience. Maxwell begins by painting a picture of a typical reader in the digital age. With hundreds of books published every year and countless lists of must-read books circulating online, it's easy to feel like we're falling behind if we don't read constantly. Many people set ambitious reading goals, 50 books a year, 100 books a year, as if hitting that number will somehow make them more intellectual, more knowledgeable, or more accomplished. But Maxwell asks us to pause and consider, what's the point of reading so many books if we're not really absorbing or applying what we've learned? He recounts the story of a woman named Emily, a self-proclaimed bookworm who set out to read 100 books in a year. She meticulously tracked her progress, keeping a spreadsheet of the titles she finished and setting weekly reading targets to stay on pace. As the months went by, Emily prided herself on the number of books she could breeze through. But when a friend asked her about a specific book she had read just a few months earlier, Emily struggled to remember the key details. The plot, the characters, even the central themes had become hazy. She realized that while she had been consuming books at a rapid pace, she wasn't truly engaging with them. The act of reading had become more about reaching a goal than about gaining knowledge or insight. Maxwell uses Emily's story to highlight a growing trend in modern reading culture, the emphasis on quantity over quality. He explains that reading has become another checkbox in our productivity-obsessed lives, something we do to feel accomplished rather than to truly learn or grow. In this sense, reading has become more about the numbers, how many books we've read, how quickly we can finish them, than about the depth of our engagement with the material. Maxwell argues that this mindset is problematic for several reasons. First, it encourages shallow reading. When we're focused on finishing as many books as possible, we're less likely to take the time to reflect on what we've read or to engage with the ideas in a meaningful way. We race through the pages, eager to move on to the next book. But in doing so, we miss out on the deeper insights and lessons that come from careful, thoughtful reading. He contrasts this with the experience of reading fewer books, but engaging with them more deeply. Maxwell describes the process of slow reading, taking the time to truly absorb the material, reflect on its meaning, and think about how it applies to your life. He argues that this kind of reading, though it may be slower, is far more rewarding. It leads to a deeper understanding of the material and a greater ability to apply the knowledge in meaningful ways. Maxwell goes on to explore the psychological reasons behind our obsession with reading quantity. In a world that values speed and efficiency, we've been conditioned to believe that more is always better. Whether it's in our careers, our hobbies, or our personal lives, we're constantly encouraged to do more, achieve more, and be more productive. This mindset has seeped into our reading habits, making us feel like we're not doing enough unless we're devouring books at a rapid pace. But Maxwell argues that this approach to reading is ultimately counterproductive. He explains that when we focus on quantity, we're more likely to forget what we've read, miss important nuances, and fail to apply the lessons we've learned. In contrast, when we focus on quality, on truly engaging with the material. We're more likely to retain the information, understand its deeper meaning, and integrate it into our lives in meaningful ways. To illustrate this point, Maxwell shares the story of a man named David. Unlike Emily, David had no interest in reading a large number of books. Instead, he preferred to read a handful of books each year, but he read them slowly and deliberately. He would often read the same book multiple times, taking notes, highlighting passages, and reflecting on how the ideas applied to his own life. David's reading pace was much slower than Emily's, but the impact of the books he read was far greater. He could recall specific quotes and insights from books he had read years earlier, and he had applied many of the lessons to his personal and professional life. Maxwell presents David's story as a counterexample to the quantity over quality mindset that dominates modern reading culture. He argues that while reading fewer books may seem less impressive on the surface, it leads to a deeper, more meaningful relationship with the material. When we take the time to truly engage with a book, we're not just consuming information, we're transforming our understanding and perspective. One of the key ideas Maxwell introduces in this chapter is the concept of deep reading. Deep reading, he explains, is the opposite of the shallow, surface-level reading that often accompanies the rush to finish more books. Deep reading requires us to slow down, to engage fully with the text, and to reflect on its meaning. It's about asking questions, making connections, and thinking critically about the ideas presented. Deep reading isn't just about what's on the page, it's about how we internalize and apply the lessons in our own lives. Maxwell also explores the role of rereading in deepening our understanding of books. He argues that many of the most profound insights from a book come not from the first read, but from the second, third, or even fourth reading. Each time we revisit a book, we bring a new perspective, shaped by our own experiences and growth. We notice details we missed the first time, understand ideas more fully, and make connections that weren't apparent before. Rereading, Maxwell argues, is a powerful tool for deepening our understanding and appreciation of the books we love. He contrasts this with the modern tendency to read a book once and then move on to the next one. In our rush to consume as much as possible, we often neglect the value of revisiting books that have had a significant impact on us. Maxwell encourages readers to return to the books that have resonated with them in the past, to dig deeper into the ideas and insights that have stayed with them, and to see how their understanding has evolved over time. As the chapter progresses, Maxwell addresses the common argument that in order to stay informed or competitive, we need to read as many books as possible. He acknowledges that in certain fields, staying up to date with the latest literature can be important. But he challenges the notion that more reading automatically leads to more success. In many cases, he argues, focusing on a few key books and truly mastering their content can be far more valuable than skimming dozens of books without truly absorbing their lessons. Maxwell offers practical advice for those looking to shift from a quantity-focused approach to reading to a quality-focused one. He suggests setting aside time for reflection after finishing a book, writing down key insights, and thinking about how the lessons can be applied in your life. He also encourages readers to be selective in their reading choices. Instead of trying to read every new bestseller or trending book, choose books that align with your personal goals, interests, and values. By being intentional about your reading choices, you can ensure that each book you read adds real value to your life, rather than just contributing to an arbitrary reading goal. As the chapter draws to a close, Maxwell leaves readers with a powerful message. Reading isn't a race. It's not about how many books you can finish in a year or how quickly you can get through your reading list. It's about the depth of your engagement with the material and the impact it has on your life. By focusing on quality over quantity, we can cultivate a richer, more fulfilling reading experience, one that truly transforms the way we think, live, and grow. Maxwell's critique of the quantity over quality mindset is both a challenge and an invitation. It challenges us to rethink our approach to reading, to question whether we're reading for the right reasons, and to slow down long enough to fully engage with the books we choose. At the same time, it invites us to rediscover the joy of deep, thoughtful reading, to savor the experience of getting lost in a book, to reflect on its meaning, and to carry its lessons with us long after we've turned the final page. Chapter 7. The Power of Focused Reading. As we move into the next chapter of an uncomfortable truth about reading books, Maxwell shifts his focus from the pitfalls of quantity-based reading to a more deliberate, intentional approach that he calls focused reading. This chapter is all about slowing down, honing in on specific books that matter, and cultivating a deeper relationship with the material. In a world that glorifies multitasking and efficiency, Maxwell argues that there's tremendous power in narrowing our focus and engaging deeply with fewer books, rather than skimming the surface of many. Maxwell begins by acknowledging how easy it is to fall into the habit of trying to read everything. With so many books out there and so little time, it's tempting to read broadly, sampling a bit of everything without committing to any one subject or book for too long. But in doing so, he argues, we miss out on the opportunity to truly engage with ideas, to wrestle with them, and to fully internalize their lessons. To make his case, Maxwell contrasts the concept of focused reading with what he calls binge reading. Binge reading, much like binge-watching a TV series, is characterized by rushing through books without pausing to reflect. It's driven by the desire to consume as much content as possible, often at the expense of understanding. Binge reading, Maxwell suggests, is not a sustainable way to approach books if we want to experience real growth. Instead, he advocates for a more intentional, focused approach. Maxwell explains that focused reading is about depth, not breadth. It's about choosing a few key books that resonate with you and dedicating time to fully explore their ideas. Rather than hopping from one book to the next, focused reading involves lingering on the text, rereading passages, taking notes, and reflecting on how the material applies to your life. In many ways, focused reading is the opposite of how most of us are taught to consume content in the digital age, where speed and efficiency are prized above all else. Maxwell introduces the idea that the real value of a book often comes from the second or third reading, not the first. He explains that the first time we read a book, we're primarily focused on understanding the surface-level content, the plot, the main arguments, the key themes. But it's in the second or third reading that we start to see the subtler layers, the nuances that we missed the first time around. We begin to see how different parts of the book connect to one another, and how its ideas relate to our own experiences. This is where true insight comes from, Maxwell argues, through deep engagement with a book, rather than just moving on after a single read. One of the most powerful examples Maxwell uses to illustrate the value of focused reading is the story of a man named Paul. Paul had spent years reading dozens of self-help and personal development books, much like many of us. But despite all of his reading, he felt stuck. None of the books seemed to make a lasting impact on his life. He would feel inspired while reading, but that inspiration would quickly fade once he moved on to the next book. Frustrated, Paul decided to try something different. Instead of reading more books, he chose just one, a classic on personal development, and decided to immerse himself in it fully. For the next year, Paul read and reread that same book, taking extensive notes, reflecting on its lessons, and applying its principles to his daily life. He didn't read anything else during that time, but by the end of the year, he realized that this single book had changed his life in ways that no other book had before. The focused attention he gave to this one book allowed him to internalize its lessons in a way that hadn't been possible when he was racing through dozens of titles. Maxwell shares Paul's story to highlight the transformative potential of focused reading. By narrowing our focus to just a few books, we give ourselves the time and space to fully absorb their lessons. We move beyond surface-level understanding and begin to see how the ideas can be applied to our lives in meaningful ways. Maxwell also emphasizes that focused reading isn't just about spending more time on a single book. It's about being intentional with our reading choices. In a world filled with an overwhelming amount of content, it's easy to get distracted by the latest bestseller or the book everyone seems to be talking about. But Maxwell urges us to resist the temptation to follow the crowd and instead focus on the books that align with our personal goals and interests. He encourages readers to ask themselves, what do I want to learn? What challenges am I facing in my life right now? Which books can help me address those challenges? He suggests that by choosing books with intention, we can ensure that our reading has a purpose beyond just entertainment or intellectual vanity. Focused reading becomes a way to solve problems, to gain new perspectives, and to grow in specific areas of our lives. It's about using books as tools for personal development, rather than as trophies to display on a bookshelf or check off a list. Maxwell goes on to offer practical advice for cultivating a focused reading habit. One of his key suggestions is to limit the number of books you're reading at any given time. He acknowledges that it can be tempting to juggle multiple books, one for work, one for personal development, one for leisure, but he argues that this approach dilutes the reading experience. When we spread our attention across too many books, we're less likely to fully engage with any of them. Instead, Maxwell recommends choosing one or two books and dedicating your full attention to them until you've truly absorbed their content. Another strategy Maxwell advocates is rereading. He explains that rereading a book you've already finished is one of the most effective ways to deepen your understanding of the material. Each time you revisit a book, you're able to approach it with fresh eyes, shaped by your own growth and experiences. What may have seemed like a minor detail in the first read can take on new significance in the second or third. Rereading also allows you to catch details you missed the first time, and it reinforces the lessons you've learned. Maxwell shares the story of a business leader who rereads the same 5 books every year. These books, he explains, are foundational to the way he approaches his work and his life. By revisiting them regularly, the leader is able to stay grounded in the principles that guide him, even as new challenges and opportunities arise. This practice of rereading has allowed him to internalize the lessons of these books in a way that simply reading them once would not have accomplished. Maxwell's point here is that there's no need to constantly seek out new books in order to grow. Sometimes, the most powerful insights come from deepening our understanding of a few key texts. By returning to books that have resonated with us in the past, we give ourselves the opportunity to continue learning from them in new and profound ways. As the chapter continues, Maxwell also addresses the importance of taking notes while reading. He explains that the act of writing down key insights not only helps reinforce what you've learned, but it also forces you to engage more deeply with the material. When we take notes, we're not just passively consuming information, we're actively processing it, thinking about how it relates to other ideas, and figuring out how we can apply it to our own lives. Maxwell suggests that keeping a reading journal or annotating books can be a powerful way to make the most of focused reading. He also encourages readers to take the time to reflect on what they've read after finishing a book. Instead of immediately jumping into the next one, Maxwell recommends setting aside time to think about the key lessons and how they apply to your life. What new perspectives did the book offer? What changes can you make based on what you've learned? By reflecting on these questions, we're able to turn reading from a passive activity into an active process of growth and transformation. Maxwell's message in this chapter is clear. Reading isn't about how many books you can finish, but how deeply you engage with the books you choose. Focused reading is about slowing down, choosing books with intention, and giving yourself the time and space to fully absorb their lessons. In doing so, we can move beyond superficial understanding and cultivate a richer, more meaningful relationship with the ideas that matter most to us. As the chapter draws to a close, Maxwell leaves readers with a powerful reminder. The true value of a book doesn't come from the number of pages you turn, but from the impact its ideas have on your life. By embracing focused reading, we can unlock the transformative potential of books and use them as tools for real, lasting growth. Chapter 8. The Importance of Reflection and Application. In the final chapter of An Uncomfortable Truth About Reading Books, Lee Maxwell brings everything together by addressing the most critical step in the reading process: reflection and application. Throughout the book, Maxwell has emphasized the idea that reading in itself is not enough to create meaningful change. It's not the act of consuming words that leads to transformation, but what we do with those words once we've read them. This chapter is a deep dive into the power of reflecting on what we've read, and most importantly, applying it to our lives. Maxwell begins by drawing an analogy. Reading without reflection is like planting seeds in barren soil. No matter how many seeds you plant, they won't grow unless the soil is fertile and nurtured. Similarly, no matter how many books you read, their lessons won't take root unless you take the time to reflect on them and integrate them into your life. He points out that many readers fall into the trap of rushing from one book to the next without ever pausing to consider what they've learned. This habit, he argues, is one of the main reasons why so many people feel like they're not getting the results they want from their reading. Maxwell introduces the concept of digesting a book. Just as our bodies need time to digest food and absorb nutrients, our minds need time to digest the ideas we encounter in books. This process of mental digestion involves stepping back after finishing a book and asking ourselves important questions. What are the key takeaways? How do these ideas connect to what I already know? How can I apply these lessons to my life or work? Without this period of reflection, the ideas we encounter in books often remain abstract and disconnected from our daily lives. To emphasize the importance of reflection, Maxwell shares the story of a woman named Lisa. Lisa was an avid reader, often finishing several books a month. But despite her love of reading, she found that many of the lessons she encountered in books quickly faded from her memory. She would feel inspired while reading, but that inspiration rarely lasted beyond the final page. Frustrated, Lisa decided to experiment with a new approach. Instead of rushing from one book to the next, she began setting aside time to reflect after finishing each book. She would journal about the key ideas, think about how they applied to her life, and make a plan for how she would implement them. This simple practice transformed Lisa's relationship with books. Suddenly, the lessons she encountered didn't just stay on the page. They became part of her life. She found herself applying the principles she learned in books to her work, her relationships, and her personal growth. The result was a deeper understanding of the material and, more importantly, real changes in her life. Maxwell shares Lisa's story as a powerful example of how reflection can turn reading from a passive activity into a tool for transformation. Maxwell explains that reflection isn't just about remembering what we've read. It's about making connections between the ideas in a book and our own experiences. When we take the time to reflect, we're able to see how the lessons in a book apply to our specific challenges, goals, and circumstances. This process helps us move beyond surface-level understanding and begin to integrate the material into our lives in meaningful ways. Maxwell suggests several practical ways to build reflection into our reading routine. One of the most effective methods, he argues, is to keep a reading journal. After finishing a book, he recommends writing down the main ideas and key lessons that stood out to you. But don't stop there. Maxwell encourages readers to go deeper by asking themselves how these ideas relate to their own lives. What problems are you currently facing that this book addresses? What changes can you make based on what you've learned? By answering these questions, you begin to bridge the gap between the abstract ideas in the book and the concrete realities of your life. Maxwell also encourages readers to discuss the books they've read with others. He explains that talking about a book with friends, colleagues, or fellow readers can help clarify your understanding and reinforce the key lessons. Conversations about books often lead to new insights as other people bring different perspectives and interpretations to the material. In this way, discussing books becomes a form of collaborative reflection, where you and others can deepen your understanding together. But reflection, as Maxwell points out, is only half of the equation. The real key to getting value from reading is not just reflecting on what you've learned. It's applying those lessons to your life. Maxwell argues that this is where most readers fall short. It's easy to finish a book and feel inspired, but it's much harder to take action on that inspiration. Many readers get stuck in what Maxwell calls the knowledge trap. They keep consuming information, thinking that if they just learn more, they'll eventually be ready to act. But in reality, more knowledge doesn't always lead to more action. In fact, the pursuit of more knowledge can sometimes become a way of avoiding action. Maxwell offers a simple but powerful solution. After finishing a book, Choose 1 or 2 specific actions you can take based on what you've learned. Don't try to implement every idea or change every aspect of your life at once. Instead, focus on a few key takeaways and commit to applying them in a practical, measurable way. This approach, Maxwell explains, is the key to turning knowledge into action. It's about making small, incremental changes that add up over time, rather than trying to overhaul your entire life all at once. He shares the story of a man named Robert, who had been struggling with procrastination for years. Robert had read countless books on productivity and time management, but despite all his reading, he hadn't been able to break his procrastination habit. Frustrated, he decided to take a different approach. Instead of reading another book, Robert went back to a productivity book he had already finished and chose just one idea to implement: setting a daily, most important task. For the next month, he focused on this single strategy, making sure to complete his most important task first thing every day. The result was a dramatic improvement in Robert's productivity. By focusing on just one actionable takeaway from the book, he was able to break his procrastination habit and start making real progress on his goals. Maxwell uses Robert's story to illustrate the power of focused application. It's not about trying to implement everything you learn from a book at once. It's about choosing a few key ideas and taking consistent action on them. Maxwell also emphasizes the importance of tracking your progress. He explains that one of the reasons people struggle to apply what they've learned from books is that they don't have a system for measuring whether their efforts are paying off. To address this, he recommends setting specific, measurable goals based on the lessons from the books you read. For example, if you're reading a book on health and wellness, don't just aim to get healthier. Set a concrete goal, like exercising 3 times a week or cutting out processed foods. By tracking your progress, you can see how the ideas from the book are impacting your life and make adjustments as needed. Maxwell's overall message in this chapter is clear. Reading is only valuable if it leads to action. Reflecting on what you've learned is important, but it's the application of those lessons that makes the real difference. Books are powerful tools for personal growth, but they can't do the work for you. It's up to you to take the ideas and insights from the books you read and put them into practice in your own life. As the chapter draws to a close, Maxwell leaves readers with a final challenge. The next time you finish a book, don't just put it back on the shelf and move on to the next one. Instead, take the time to reflect on what you've learned and commit to taking action. Choose 1 or 2 specific steps you can take based on the book's lessons and make a plan to implement them in your daily life. By doing so, you'll transform the act of reading from a passive activity into a powerful catalyst for change. Maxwell concludes by reminding us that the true value of reading doesn't come from the number of books we consume or the knowledge we accumulate. It comes from the actions we take based on what we've learned. In the end, it's not the books themselves that change our lives, but what we do with the lessons they offer. And that, Maxwell argues, is the most important truth about reading books.